Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nancy Thomas-Price and Ayaka Nukui at the State Department of Education. And we're joined today by Diana Tenzer from AIR. The first thing that I would like to do before we get started in about 2 minutes is do a sound check. I want to be sure that those of you that are already online will let me know if you're hearing me okay. So if you're hearing me, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much. We are on a speakerphone because there are several of us presenting today, and so I just wanted to be sure it was clear enough. If you have concerns about sound, you can leave us a message in the question box. We'll start in just a couple of minutes. Good afternoon. Once again, this is Nancy Thomas-Price, the ISAT Comprehensive Assessment Coordinator here at the State Department of Education. And we're joined today by Ayaka Nukui, who is our, she has many, many titles. She is one of our assessment integrity people, and she's been quite involved with putting together many of our manuals and ensuring that we have a safe assessment, so a safe and secure assessment. Also from AIR, Diana Tenzer is joining us today, and she will be also covering some of the test impropriety features that are in TIDE, but there's a little bit more to it than just TIDE. So we're going to start with that. Again, if you have questions, please post them in the question box. We will be posting this webinar at some point after it's completed. I did send out some handouts this morning detailing what this presentation would look like, and some note-taking handouts. And so you can use those. I also uploaded them to the test site. So if you didn't, or to the webinar site, I'm sorry. So if you didn't get those, you should be able to get them now that you're logged in. Everyone is muted. So if you do have questions, because we have a fairly large audience today, the best thing to do would be to write them in the question box, and then we will try to get to them at some normal natural stopping points throughout this presentation. We'll also allow some time at the end, and we will post a Q&A document from the different questions we received too after the webinar is over. So I would like to just start with a question that we have for all of you. And you can go ahead and select your answer. Why is it important that we pay attention to test improprieties? Again, just trying to get a feel for where people's heads are at. Go ahead and make your selections there. There are no right answers to this poll, but we wanted to see what people are thinking about as we get into this webinar and what some of your feelings are about dealing with improprieties. It's correct that one of the reasons we pay attention to this is so that everyone have a fair testing experience. We also want to make sure that the data that we're getting is accurate and that there isn't anything getting in the way of students responding in a way that would reflect their student achievement. So is it required by law? Well, it just depends on how you read the law. To some degree it is. It's required in our ESSA plan that we have submitted, that the test is fair and that it's secure, etc. And that also students are not cheating and our test items are not exposed to the public. So there are a number of places that it is required that we ensure a safe testing environment. Also, we just want to make sure that the test is allowed to do its job in terms of being a valid test, that it's actually testing what it says that it will test, and the data that we get from the assessment is something that we can count on in terms of making some assumptions. So that was interesting. I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm not sure if you were able to see how folks responded, but 63% said to ensure we have a fair test environment, 66% feel that we pay attention so that we can receive accurate data, 45% believe that it's required by law so that we document test security incidents, and 84% said that it could actually affect the test, the job of the test, and what we're asking the test to do. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ayaka, and she's going to talk with us in a little bit more detail about our test improprieties and also TIDE's test impropriety features.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everyone. This is Ayaka. She's really awesome with these webinar polls and stuff, and so it was really cool to see your answers. Before, oh, sorry. There. Before we talk about test improprieties, and this is a webinar about test improprieties, I wanted to give you a bigger picture of test improprieties. Test impropriety, TIDE test impropriety is a part of incident. So it's really that we need to talk about incident first. And I'm going to cover what is an incident first, so you can really understand what kind of test improprieties you need to record in TIDE in order to presume testing. So incident is anything that could affect the validity or reliability of the test. When you spot anything that could potentially affect how the student or other students perform, you should suspect an incident. An incident is not just about cheating. Incident could be intended or unintended. For example, a student could kick the power strip intentionally or unintentionally. But if a proctor believes that the restarting the computers could have affected the student's scores or ability to perform on the test, it is considered an incident. An incident could be caused by adult, student, or anything that is outside of our control. For example, if you believe that a sudden power outage has affected the student's ability to perform on the test, it is considered an incident. On the other hand, if you believe that a planned fire drill has affected the student's scores, it is an incident caused by adult. And we are going to talk about 3 key strategies to fight against incidents. That includes prevention, detection, and escalation in the following slides. So what is most important about controlling incident is really the prevention. And I like you to, hopefully you have, but if you haven't, I like you to review the Assessment Integrity Guide. It is a comprehensive guide to talk about test incident and how we can prevent, detect, and escalate test incidents. Person must have access to this guide in order to sign the Assessment Confidentiality Agreement form, and the form is required to administer any secure assessments, and it is actually required every year to fill out. The guide specifically discusses important incident prevention topics like these that you can see on the screen that I'm not going to read every single one, but that are in more details. And then you can find Assessment Integrity Guide in these 2 locations. You can go to our assessment department website, and under Resource Center and Resource Files, Test Incident Log information, you can find the guide, as well as in the Test Incident Log. It's an application where you record incidents, and then we'll talk about that in a little bit later. There you go. So next is an incident detection and escalation. And what is really important is that you monitor test sessions or train your proctors to monitor the test sessions. Without being detected, an incident could lead to misidentification of students, schools, and program effectiveness. If an incident is reported by the third party, such as parents or news reporters, it could result in a loss of school credibility. It is also important to immediately evaluate the severity of the incident when it is not only suspicious but obvious that the incident clearly affected the student or other students' test scores or ability to perform on the test. Quickly notify the state test coordinator, like Nancy, or me, or in case of access, you can notify Melanie, or science is Heidi. Once detected, we encourage you to keep track of incidents using our secure test incident log. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. Lastly, if you or someone encounters a student response that raises sufficient concern about the safety of the student or students during or after the test administration, immediately notify the corresponding test coordinator. The examples of such responses include suicide, criminal activity, alcohol, drug use, depression, violence, abuse, or neglect. And we also have an incident hotline. The number is listed there, 208-332-6995. If you wanted to anonymously report any instance, you can always call that number, and it's a voicemail that you can just leave a message. You can find Test Incident Log under our Resource Center again and portals. There's a blog that says Test Incident Log, and you can click that and take you to the Test Incident Log. I'm not going to talk about any details about the application because it's really easy to use, and there is a manual on the application if you go to the application, but just give me a call or email me if you have any questions or concerns regarding this application. And we got a question, says, has the test security agreement been updated, or can we use the one currently posted in the state Idaho portal? Is the Idaho portal has been updated?
I'm not sure which one.
Yes, yes, it has. The document that is in the portal is the most current one for this year.
Okay, thank you, Diana. That was Diana from AIR. We do have updated version of test security agreement on our website as well. If you'd like to access the latest one, it's available there. Thank you, Kathy, for the question. So I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, and she's going to talk about how test impropriety fits the bigger picture of incident.
Often it's required that the person that's in the testing environment make a decision about whether or not something that has occurred will actually affect the students or the outcome of the assessment. And anything like that is considered an incident. You'll notice in our test integrity guide that we divide incidents into 3 levels of severity. The first is an irregularity, the second is an impropriety, and the third is a breach. So those 3 different types, and you can go to our document to actually read about the differences in those types. What can be a little bit confusing, however, is that in TIDE, anything that is filed there is considered an impropriety. AIR just calls any test incident that affects the test and we need to take action on the test, they call that an impropriety. So we're using impropriety in a couple of different ways. I hope it's not too confusing that we do that, but we've kind of bunched everything together that affects the test and that some action has to be taken in TIDE that results in a change in the test. That is considered an impropriety by AIR. I'm now going to hand this over to Diana Tenzer, who is one of our program managers from AIR.
Thank you, Nancy.
You should now be seeing Diana's screen. So thank you, Diana.
Yes, thank you both, Ayika. And I'm sorry that I jumped in so abruptly to answer that question, but I'm happy we got that question answered. So yes, let's talk about the test impropriety workflow from the TIDE system side. So kind of before we get into it, I just wanted to briefly discuss basically the flow of a test opportunity. So what happens is, the student logs into the student interface, they complete and they submit their test. And then obviously all of those responses are then submitted to the online reporting system, or also called ORS, where they will report the student's test scores. So test improprieties are a way of interrupting that normal flow. And the reasons for it can definitely vary. That's why we have different types of test improprieties. So for example, a student may have to reset their test if their test settings are not in place prior to testing, or a district or school level user may have to invalidate a test because the student logged in and started a test that he or she shouldn't have. So there are 6 different types of test improprieties, and I want to briefly talk about each one of them. Nancy was also able to provide some examples, but I know that we're going to provide more examples for you because obviously these situations that we're showing you on the screen are not the only ones that happen, but they are some of the most typical situations. But we will have a dedicated test improprieties and TIDE chapter in our really big AIR systems user guide that's currently being updated. And I know that the plan is for us to post that very soon, but Nancy will talk about that a little bit further along the presentation. So the first type of impropriety is invalidating a test, which basically this one eliminates the test opportunity completely. And the student basically has no further chance to complete that test. So a perfect example of this one would be if they started a test, but they discover that they should be taking the alternate assessment instead of the ISAT, ELA, or math test. The resetting a test, it basically allows the student to restart a test opportunity, but it removes all of the student's responses on the test. So this one would be, for example, if the correct or the appropriate accommodations were not provided prior to testing. For example, if the student requires text-to-speech and they started the test without it, they would have to reset the test. Reopening the test, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to reopen the test that was completed, invalidated, or expired. So this one is, if something really bad happens, like a student got really sick and their test expired, but the test window is still open. And then the next one is reopening a test segment, which obviously it's going to reopen a previous test segment that the student completed and then went on to start a new one. So the perfect example for this one would be they did not go back. They submitted that segment, they started the new one, but they did not go back to check any of those flagged items that they have or marked for review items. Restore a test that was reset. So this one, it basically reverses the reset a test type of impropriety. And that one could be if the perfect example would be if you submitted that resetted test and you should not have. So we have the ability to basically restore that test. And the last one is grace period extension, which I know must be used for really, really, drastic measures. It's not one that is not recommended to be using lightly. But for instance, this would be the perfect example for this one would be if the test was interrupted by a school fire drill. So the reason we're not encouraging this one is because it actually allows the student to review any answer questions upon resuming their test because, the test was interrupted, and when they went back, it was after the 20-minute pause rule. So those are the 6 different types of test improprieties that are currently available for you to submit in TIDE. And when I say currently, I should say this lightly because they're not actually available right now. This will launch once we go live with our end of course and learners characteristic inventory assessments on the 26th of this month. So let's get ready to actually submit that test impropriety. So the first step obviously is going to be logging into TIDE. And once you log in, you're going to see this homepage as you're seeing it right now with all of the different tasks related to test impropriety. So if you look right in the middle, that green section where it says administering tests, that is where the test impropriety feature is going to be located. The ability to do different things with the test impropriety feature is going to be completely dependent upon the role that you have. So obviously as a district level user, you will have access to create, view, and upload test improprieties. And I should also say as a school level user, you also have access to those 3 tasks as well. But once you get into the teacher or the test administrator role, the only access you'll have is to view a test impropriety. Okay, so I really wanted to highlight that only district and school level users have access to creating a test impropriety. Obviously creating it manually, which we're going to discuss right now, or create it through a file upload. So the create test impropriety task menu allows, as I said, district or school level users to create new test improprieties. So only state level users have the access to approve, to review and approve these improprieties. So how do you do it? Basically, from that test improprieties task menu, you're going to click that little drop down and you're going to select the create test improprieties. And then you're going to see this page on the right side where it's going to ask you to select a request type. So now that you have your test improprieties ready to create them, if you're unsure which type of impropriety you should be selecting, one, we highly recommend reviewing the chapter, the test improprieties in TIDE chapter in that systems user guide to provide more details so you can make a better decision about which type of impropriety you are about to choose. So, but the next step, once you know the type of impropriety, you're going to click on that little radio button. And then you're also going to click on the search student by. You have 3 different options for that one. You have the result ID, the session ID, and the EDU ID. Obviously, the EDU ID is the student's ID that should already be in TIDE. The session ID is going to be that little code that the test proctor received when they started proctoring that test. And then the results ID is a little bit more tricky to obtain. So basically, every time that a student starts a test, a result ID is generated by the test delivery system. And that is something that us as AIR use a lot internally, but you can also obtain this result ID from the Plan and Manage Testing Participation Report. So this one would require a little bit more of additional steps for you to obtain. It's completely doable, but if you're trying to get the information a little bit faster, I would recommend using either the student's EDU ID if you have a specific student, or if you're trying to create a test impropriety for an entire room that was in that session, I would recommend using the session ID. So once you have all of that information selected in TIDE, you are going to click that little search button. Okay, once you click that search button, this basically is going to pop up. This number of records found is going to appear at the bottom of the page. So obviously, it's going to show all of the tests that the student has completed. And that in that page, you have the choice to select whatever test it is that you're trying to submit a test impropriety for. You can select all of them, or you can just select a specific test. So let's say that I don't want to invalidate every single test that I took, or maybe I do. So then I select the specific one, and I'm going to click on that Create button. Once I click on that little Create button, this is actually something new. This is not something that we had last year. That little pop-up window that you're showing as new is going to appear on your screen. So out of the 6 different test improprieties that we have determined different reasons for each one of them. So you have the ability to choose any of the ones from the drop-down. You can also choose other if it doesn't apply to the type of, to the reason you're submitting this. But we definitely want to encourage everybody in the additional comments to provide as much detail as possible for the reason why you are submitting this test impropriety. I think this will facilitate on the State Department side to review and you know, decide whether the test impropriety should be approved or not. I know SDE is planning to carefully review each one of them. So once as the State Department has reviewed and taken action on that test impropriety, then the user who submitted the test impropriety will receive an email indicating if it was approved. So again, for more information about creating test improprieties, and like I said, this is sort of the manual way to do it. So I would only suggest using this specific feature that create test improprieties manually if you're trying to only submit for, you know, just a couple of students, like 2 or 3 students. We're going to talk about if you're trying to submit for a larger group of students. But again, all of this information is in Chapter 9 of the Test Improprieties in TIDE, the Chapter 9 Test Improprieties in TIDE of the AIR Systems User Guide. Great. So as I mentioned, if you have a lot of test improprieties that you're trying to submit, let's say that you're trying to submit for an entire, you know, session that your TA proctor, and you have, you know, about 20 students, I would think that creating it the manual way would be a little bit time consuming. So the best way to do this would be to do it through a file upload. So this one is pretty simple. If you're very familiar with AIR's upload template files, they all work exactly the same, where you click on the upload test improprieties, it opens up the page on the right. And then on the little button that says download template, you have the option to download a CSV or an Excel. We always encourage users to use Excel because it's a little bit more user friendly. And obviously from that Excel file, which I'm going to show you the different fields within that file, you have to complete that information. And then once that information is completed, then obviously you save it onto your, you can save it to your desktop or to your personal hard drive, and then you're just going to upload that information into the system. So let me show you what the specific fields for are indicated in this upload file. So once you download the file, this is exactly what it's going to look like, okay? You're going to have the type, the search type, the search value, the reason, and the comment. If you notice, it is the same fields that we're showing when you were trying to create the test impropriety manually. So it's really not any different. The only difference is that you're doing it in an Excel file. So what you're going to do is you're going to select under the type. You actually already have the types of test improprieties pre-populated. So you click on the little drop down and you make the selection that you need to. Under the search type, you have, again, as I mentioned, those three options. The results ID, which is always going to be a 5-digit value. And as I previously mentioned, the only way to obtain this is from the Plan and Manage Testing participation reports, which is available in the Monitoring Test Progress feature in Tide. It's also available in that same green Administering Test session. So as I mentioned before, that results ID is basically just a code that our test delivery system generates once a student starts a test. The EDU ID you're all very familiar with, so you want to make sure that the student you're trying to find is actually in the system. It has to be in the system, and that's always going to be a 9-digit value. And the session ID is always going to be that little code that the proctor, whether it was the test administrator or a teacher, received when they started their test session. The reasons, those are also going to be pre-populated depending on the type of test impropriety that you have selected. So for instance, what I'm showing on the screen, if I selected invalidating a test, then I would receive administering wrong test as one of my reasons in that dropdown. For reset a test, I would receive internet connectivity issue as one of the options in the dropdown. So the reasons will completely vary depending on the type of test impropriety you're trying to submit. Now, it's the comments that's really up to you to decide how much information you are entering regarding your test impropriety. But as I mentioned, we are really, really encouraging people to be as detailed as they can, because it is the State Department that's reviewing these. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of districts and a lot of people are submitting these improprieties. So we want to make sure that, you know, we don't need to contact people, or, you know, whoever is approving them doesn't have questions about, because there's not a lot of details. So definitely you have enough characters for you to include in there to add as much information as possible. I know I'm sounding like a broken record on this, but you can tell that we're really trying to encourage this. So once you have all of your information in there for your test improprieties and you've saved your document into your local drive, what you're going to do is obviously just click browse and pick up that document, and then you're going to go through a preview page. Once you upload it and you click next, the next step is going to be the preview page, which is basically going to show you everything that is in your Excel template. So if you see something that's wrong there, or that doesn't match what you had in your Excel template, make sure that you cancel it and review your Excel template, and make sure that the information is accurate. So after you've gone through the preview page, let's imagine it's a perfect world and everything looks great. You're gonna click next, and you're gonna go through a validation page, which is basically gonna show you any errors that occurred when the system was trying to pick up your file. So for instance, if you decided to do invalidating a test and you did not choose a correct search type or perhaps a correct search value. Let's imagine that you chose results ID, but you only inserted 3 characters. The system is only going to accept 5 characters for that specific field, or the same thing with EDU ID. If you try to enter less characters than 9, you will get an error message. So this is when you have the ability to basically review your file, make any corrections, and then re-upload the revised file. If, you know, everything went perfectly great, amazing, nothing is wrong, then obviously your file will completely, Tide will pick up your file, and then it's gonna show you as the last step, it's gonna commit the file, and then it's gonna show you a confirmation page that basically tells you the number of records that were committed. Once you are done confirming that, then you can choose to upload a new file, or then you can just choose to get out of there. Something that I also really encourage for those of you who attended the Idaho Roadshow, I really encourage that if you have any issues with your upload, make sure you do contact the Idaho Help Desk, and they will help you and walk you through any errors that you're receiving and any fixes that are needed for that specific file. So maybe some of you are wondering, okay, so what happens after I submit it? So after you create and you submit your test impropriety, the State Department of Education is then going to take, you know, some time to carefully review your request, and they're either going to approve or they're going to deny your request. So that's why it's really important to choose the appropriate type of impropriety that you're requesting in order to avoid any delays in testing. So make sure that you are reviewing that Chapter 9 of that manual, and making sure that, you know, using those examples as a guide to ensure that you are selecting the correct type of test impropriety. Now, something to really keep in mind for everyone is that unfortunately the approval process for these test improprieties is completely manual, and it's dependent on, you know, review and, you know, from the State Department. So that's why I have said it, you know, like I said, sounding like a broken record, it's very important that you add as much context in that additional comments box. And so you can get, you know, a faster review and process from the State Department. But once SDE or the State Department approves the test impropriety, then you will be able to take immediate action, whether, you know, it resetted the student's test or it invalidated the test or so on. Okay, so viewing test improprieties. So this is if you want to, you know, sort of see the life cycle of your test impropriety, or you want to check where it stands. Again, everybody, as I mentioned it before, every single user has access to view. It's only restricted to submitting test improprieties, but everybody has access to view it. So the way that you're going to do it is, in that test improprieties page, you're going to select view test improprieties, and you're going to see a page that looks very much like the one on the right, where you have 3 different columns. One is choose the request type, choose the request status, and then the additional request criteria. So you can either look at all, if you feel like within your school or your district, you've seen people submit all types of different test improprieties, or you can get obviously specific. And then with choosing a request status, I would always suggest entering all, because obviously the system is going to review for all of those different statuses that are listed right there. But if you're looking for a very specific one, then you absolutely have that option. And you can also do an additional request criteria by entering, you know, the session ID, though it's absolutely not necessary if you don't want to enter that information for the system to populate your data. Okay, so once you have entered all of that information in there and the page is going to basically ask you if you want to export your results to the inbox. This is actually something new. Users have the ability to export data now when they're using when they're trying to basically export test impropriety information, where they're trying to export student information, and when they're trying to export user information. So you don't have to view the results on that page. If you want to export the data to actually receive an Excel file, then you may do so that way. But if you just want to quickly view your results, you can also just click view results, and it's going to show a page that looks very similar to the one that's on the bottom. And it basically is going to show the different request statuses. So if you click on that little green little icon right there, then you can see more information about that specific status. Now, if you click on that process button right there, you can also view some additional actions, like some of the ones I listed below. So you can select retract if you want to retract a test impropriety request that was accidentally submitted. So you can retract it right then. Or you can select also resubmit if you want to resubmit a test impropriety request that appears in the rejected by system status. So those are some of the options that the process button is going to have available for you. Okay, so obviously during the life of the test impropriety, there's going to be different statuses. It's going to go through different statuses. As I know that in the past, there's been some, specifically with the rejected by system, there's been some questions as far as, you know, when you submit it and it's rejected and you're unsure what's going on, you know, why was it rejected? So a lot of times something that we have noticed, and that's why I included it as a note on this specific slide, is that sometimes if you submit a test impropriety twice and one of them has been approved, the other test impropriety will be basically placed in a rejected by the system status. So you want to make sure that when you submit your test improprieties, you are sort of viewing all of the test improprieties that you have and filtering them by the rejected by the system status. And obviously you can filter it also by the EDU ID. So I just want to make sure that also everyone is aware, now that we're launching our test improprieties application in TIDE at the end of the month. It has also been significantly revamped. While there's not a lot of like visual changes other than that reasons and additional comments box, I know that on the background we have done extensive fixes to make sure that the application works efficiently and fast. But I do also want to remind that there is a little bit of a patient process in terms of the approval process. As I mentioned, it's very manual. So it does require, you know, people to be reviewing those and, you know, approving them one by one. So definitely when you're submitting these, you know, have a little bit of patience and know that your test improprieties will be, some action will be taken on one of them. And again, if you are encountering any issues when you are submitting these test improprieties, please make sure that you call the Idaho Help Desk and you provide sort of a detailed explanation of what you're encountering, so we can also work with our help desk staff to get your issue fixed as soon as possible. I hope I didn't go too fast. Sometimes in these presentations, I tend to talk a little bit too fast. So hopefully everybody understood everything that I said and I wasn't just rambling. So I am going to actually hand it off to Nancy because I know she's going to point out some of the resources that are coming up pretty soon and are going to be available on the portal. Nancy, I hope that you have, there you go. The screen is now yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. I will cover just a few more things, but we're nearing the end of our presentation. So if you have additional questions, please go ahead and submit them. If we don't get to all of them, we'll include them in a Q&A. But right now, I'm going to launch, or I have launched, another audience poll just to see where people are thinking, what people are thinking right now, where you are in your thinking. And you'll notice the question says, what is the best way to manage test improprieties? So let's just kind of see where everyone's heads are at, and I'll leave that poll open for just a minute or two, and we can talk again about just reviewing what we've heard today and thinking about what is the best way to manage test improprieties. Thanks for all of you that are engaged in the presentation and responding to our poll. It's great for us to sort of see what you're thinking at this point. Looks like we've had about 80% of you vote in the poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Really appreciate folks sharing their thoughts. It looks like, fortunately, no one said we're going to ignore them. We're going to ignore test improprieties. Fortunately, most of you did indicate that the best way to deal with test improprieties is to prevent them before they occur. And we have made extreme attempts to make sure that you have all the materials that you need to train your proctors and prepare them for the test window and prepare them for a good experience with the assessment. But we do understand that things happen, right? So things can happen when you're in a perfect world. Everything would be 100% and go right, but things can happen, and so that's why we have test improprieties. I wanted you to know where you can find additional information about the content that we've covered today. The big question, of course, is when will our test administration manual be released? And any day now. We had a roadshow a little bit earlier in the year, and so that took precedent. And so we've been furiously reviewing both Chapter 9, which is the Guide to Test Improprieties, and Chapter 10 in our large manual, our large systems manual. So we will post an announcement on the portal when we have posted those chapters and reposted that large systems manual. So stay tuned for that. We know Monday's a holiday and you are not in, so we're certainly attempting to get it out absolutely as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that it's as accurate as could be before we do post it. So again, Assessment and Accountability Department also offers the following resources that relate to test security, and manuals and quick guides are actually in their own folder, but when you go into the portal, different ways to get to that resources tile, but the system information is going to be where you'll find the systems manual. So a few things to remember here. When you contact the AIR Help Desk for assistance with any technical issues you may encounter, you should have those error messages, make sure that you capture those, make sure that you know what your operating system and browser information is, allow them to get back to you by providing the correct contact information, and then also other relevant information. Remember not to send student EDU IDs or student names through email. So don't email the help desk with student identifying information. Be careful about that. And You can often refer to your district test coordinator if you have questions. Just a few closing comments from me. Remember that test improprieties affect the student's testing experience. And as we said in the poll, the best way to actually prevent those, the best way to handle those is to prevent them in the first place. We want to make sure that students have every benefit possible for showing us where they're at in their achievement at the end of the year when they take this assessment. So we want to provide the absolute best experience that we can. Only sometimes does a test impropriety require that action be taken on an assessment and you file an impropriety in TIDE. So for example, if you have students filing into the room and one of the students is really raising a ruckus and causing a lot of problems, and some of the students in there are feeling some anxiety because of that student's behavior, the test would not have been affected, but you would still file that as a test impropriety, because if they do sit down to test, they may be really having some anxiety and not able to retrieve information from their brains as well as we would want them to. There are two options. One is to file the SDE, or one is to file both with TIDE and the SDE. But anything that's filed in TIDE should also be filed as a test impropriety on the application and through the SDE application that IACA went over for you. If you're unsure about the type of impropriety, you can check our documentation. We provide several examples. You can email me. I am completely dedicated to the administration of our assessment once the window opens. I'm very responsive to your calls, to your emails, and also try to respond to test improprieties in TIDE within 24 hours. If I can, I get to them during the day. If I can't, I do them at home at night before the end of the day so that you can resume testing the next day. If you're not sure if a type of incident has affected the students, whether it's serious or not, you should ask them and say, do you feel that you can go on with the test? Do you feel comfortable right now testing? And you know, students will be honest with you, hopefully. Also, provide as much information as possible. Diana mentioned that several times, and I'm going to mention it again, so that we know what has happened in the incident, and we can approve it without having to get back in touch with you. Remember too that students need to answer every single item on their test before submitting it. There is no option to accidentally submit a test. They are prompted 4 times to submit a test. They need to pause the test if they want to come back to it, but if they submit the test, they're responsible for submitting the test, and the test will not be reopened. Students cannot end a test in error. You need to make sure that they pause the test if they're going to come back to it, and that has been made very clear to students, because it will ask them, are you sure you want to submit your test in final? And they're asked a number of different ways. So that really is not going to be accidental if they do that. So make sure that students know everything they need to know about the test environment. Okay, well, I think that us not having a lot of questions is a good indication that we have covered most of the information in its entirety that we not only intended to today, but that you need to have in order to continue on with your testing and prepare for the testing window. Before I post this, I'm going to add IACA's information here as our test security coordinator to this slide. And so I'll make sure that you have that as well in case there are any specific test security questions you might have. Diana, do you have anything else to add before we end today?
No, I think we covered everything, and I'm also very happy to hear that there were not a lot of questions, because as you said, it indicates that we covered all of the highlights of this application and people are very clear on it. So definitely happy testing, everyone, because it's definitely sneaking up on us.
Okay, it's about almost 25 after the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar and give you that 5 minutes back that you were planning on being here. Again, if anything comes up that you're unsure of, please do not hesitate to contact us. Heidi, of course, is helping and overseeing the science. I am here if you can't reach one of us. Carlin is also available to help. AIR Help Desk. So be sure to reach out before you reach the frustration point. We're here to make sure that your administration goes smoothly. And most of all, we want to make sure that it goes smoothly for students and they're able to have the right environment to be able to respond to the items on the assessment. So thank you very much for your time today. You guys are always a great audience. We're so fortunate to be here and able to help each other as well through the Edmodo users site. So if you have questions, you can add them to that site as well if you think everyone might want to know your answer. Take care and have a great long weekend.
Thank you.